Graham Moss at the Incline Press has been kind enough to lend me this review copy of his latest book, MEMENTO MORI, MEMENTO VIVERE, published by the Incline Press in 2023 in a limitation of 175 copies. Of those, 100 copies were ordinaries, and this is an example of one of those ordinary copies. So let's take a closer look. The binding of these ordinaries was handled by Roger Gretsch, whose work will be familiar to many viewers of this channel, and we see that we get a slipcase which has this natural linen cloth around all four of its edges, and then the sides are covered in this nice paper which is printed with a lino-cut design by Nicolette Scarpa. Turning the slipcase over to its end, we have a title label here printed and affixed to the spine of the slipcase, which means the book can be shelved spine inward, protecting the book itself from any sun damage. Otherwise, just to remark that this is characteristic of Roger's work, so the slipcase feels very sturdy and well made, and the corners are nice and sharp, altogether a nice slipcase. If we remove the book from its case, we find that it follows the same design language as the slipcase. So again, we have this natural linen cloth spine, and then we have the boards covered in the paper with this lino-cut design, and the front and rear boards have exactly the same design. And if we turn over to the spine, we find that it's plain, there's no label, because we had that label on the slipcase. Here we could see the text block, already a bit of a hint here that we have various different types of paper, different colours going on. Of course, the binding is sewn, we have these striped end bands. So altogether, nice exterior presentation. As usual, the book feels very well made, and I quite like this lino-cut design. It somehow to me gives the book a sort of homespun quality, and I mean that not in a derogatory way, but in quite a charming fashion that I think is quite fitting for the subject matter of the book, as we'll see in just a moment. So now if we open the book, we first come to end papers, which again have that same lino-cut design, so there's a consistent design language throughout here, and then affixed to the front paste down we have this brown library pouch, inside of which is a photograph. And this is a photograph of a lady named Kathleen Whelan, who was the partner both in printing and in life of Graham Moss. And Kathy, as she's affectionately known throughout the book, succumbed to cancer in 2020, and the fundamental purpose of this book is essentially a memorial and celebration of Kathy's life. I should say that this is a proper photographic print, so we can see here on the back, this was printed on Fuji photographic paper. So now we go into the book proper. For the most part, it's been printed on this nice, smooth, cream Magnani paper, and we have here the half title, and then we go immediately into the format that's going to carry us through to the end of the book. On the verso page, we have some descriptive text that is part of these numbered sections. We have a section header here, printed in blue ink from what looks like wooden type. And then we have this text which describes what is the exhibit that we see here on the recto side. And the general structure of the book is that we're going to have 50 of these exhibits which all relate in some way to Kathy's life. And the idea is that as we go through the book, we not only get exposed to some nice examples of letterpress printing, and we'll see plenty of that as we go along, but also get to know a little bit about Kathy the person. The descriptive text here is uniformly set in Centaur, a typeface designed by Bruce Rogers. It's one of my personal favourites, and it itself is divided into two parts. So the top part above this paragraph break is essentially a caption for the exhibit that we see over on the recto side, and below the paragraph break we will always have a typographic description of what we're looking at. So what were the typefaces used, what was the source of the wood blocks that we used to print engravings, and so on. And so our first exhibit here is this death notice from Kathy. So right away we get a bit of a sense of what the book is about, and we can see that this was typeset in Bembo, and so that's a hint right away that this is not going to be a book that is set entirely in Centaur. There's going to be a huge variety of typography on display as we go along. And then we come to the second section, and so this is a little bit unusual in that the title page for this book is already in section number 2, but here it is all the same. And we see the title Memento Mori, Memento Vivere. Now my Latin is not superb, but this could essentially be translated as remember your own mortality and therefore remember to live your life to the fullest, which I think are nice words to live by. And then we have a subtitle, a typographic interpretation of a commonplace book. So commonplace books were early antecedents of what we might now call scrapbooks. And we'll see as we go along, there's a really nice collection of ephemera often tipped into this book. And that's a little bit what I was hinting at when I said the design had a homespun quality. One could almost imagine somebody sitting at their dining table at the weekend compiling this book by sticking the various bits and pieces in, which I think is a nice touch. Section 3 here is a dedication. And then section 4 is a introduction in which Graham now gives us a bit more of the full story. So he explains who was Cathy, the nature of her illness, the circumstances of her death, so that readers who may not be familiar with that story understand really what this book is supposed to be about. And from there, the sections adopt a steady rhythm of presenting, here on the recto side, nice examples of typography, printing more generally. We'll see lots of examples of wood engraving, and as I said, all tied in some way to Cathy's life as described in the text here on this verso leaf. We see, by the way, also here another example of paper. So the whole book is not printed on this cream Magnani paper. We also have various other stocks throughout in a variety of colours, as we'll see. Here's a nice example of woodblock printing. I shall not pause and dwell on every section, but we can leaf through the book and have a look at some of the interesting tidbits that are in here. So here we have some ephemera, these cards. Everything, of course, has been printed letterpress. Lots of examples of poetry, textual excerpts from books that Cathy enjoyed, and other such literary material. Also examples of various kinds of small broadsides, public service notices and such. Here we have a nice Victorian wood engraving. Here a nice example of, again, some of this typographic richness. So we see different typefaces here, a variety of different ink colours used throughout. So a very rich book to look at for any bibliophile or typophile. The paper stocks vary not only in their colour but also in their texture. So this one is a little bit coarser, for example, which makes it a sort of fairly interesting tactile experience to leaf through. We can see an address card, a bookmark, lots of ephemera of that nature tipped in. Here's a really nice example of a large lino cut by Mark Hurd. I believe this was originally intended as the binding design for the book, but that didn't work out. I hope it gets used somewhere because I really enjoyed this design, and the contrast of colours here too I thought was really quite nice. Lots of examples of lino cuts, wood cuts and other types of relief printing. And as I said, all of these exhibits, they are not arbitrary, but they have stories attached to them. One of Cathy's passions was gardening, and so we'll see lots of exhibits that are about gardening and related themes. Here we have, simply loosely inserted, a admissions ticket to a garden visited by Cathy. And here on the recto leaf, we have one of my favourite poems, or at least an excerpt from the poem, The Glory of the Garden by Rudyard Kipling. The text here slightly edited to be a bit more inclusive, but I had fun spotting that excerpt here in the book. Here we have a nice example of a page where on top we have this notice which was put through the letterbox of people to thank them for keeping a nice garden and therefore providing a home for bees. And that's overlaid on top of a sheet that is printed with this relief print of some bees. But that was quite nice. Here's a variety of labels printed again, letterpress, everything letterpress. Here are more textual excerpts. We have recipes, several recipes in the book. Some public service notices. Here we have mounted into the book an article that was written by Kathy for the Whittington Press's Matrix Journal. And this is an article about the wood engravings that Bert Eastman made of Indian toys. We can see it's illustrated with prints of his work and text, as I said, by Kathy. Here's a nice lino cut by Nick Wonham, which I think is due to be used in a forthcoming Incline Press publication. More jar labels and other various bits of ephemera. This was from an event that was being run and was printed to give to attendees as a keepsake. Again, interesting variety of paper and paper colours on display. As we reach the later stages of the book, we inevitably arrive at more signs of Kathy's illness. Here, for example, is a notice related to the carers who were visiting to support her at home in her final weeks. It's quite moving in places, but not in a way that's depressing. It also presents quite an affirming portrait of an individual, even though I never had the pleasure to know her. Here we have an errata card. The typeface was not identified correctly, but I think I'm right in saying that's the only errata in the book. And then a final few exhibits. Of course, the book ultimately ends with Kathy's death. And then, as usual, we have a colophon with some details about the book's production and a notice here explaining the book was a Judge's Choice Prize winner at the Oxford Fine Press Book Fair back in March 22. So that is Memento Mori, Memento Vivere by Graham Moss, published by Graham Moss's Incline Press. It's a nicely made book. It's a very rich and interesting book from the perspective of a bibliophile or a typophile. As we saw, there are very many different typefaces on display, different mediums of illustration with a wide variety of lino cuts, wood engravings and other relief prints. But also, if one takes the time to sit and read the text, as I said, it's quite a moving portrait of a character who was very much invested in this world of book collecting and book loving that we all share together. So a very enjoyable, very nicely presented book from the Incline Press.